Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our Bringing Digital Learning into the History Classroom series. For tonight's session, we have Frankie Abbott joining us from the Digital Public Library of America, and we're really excited for the wonderful slides that she's going to show us how to really take advantage and use the primary sources that you can find within the Digital Public Library of America. At the end of the presentation, what I'll do is I'll jump on and I'll walk you through your activities that you'll find in Google Classroom. I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Frankie.
Hello. Well, thanks so much to Natasha for having me. And as she said, my name is Frankie Abbott, and I am the Curation and Education Strategist working for the Digital Public Library of America. And as she also mentioned, tonight I'm just going to talk through what the Digital Public Library of America is and some ways in which I hope that it might be useful to you in terms of planning for your classroom and engaging your students. For those of you who have not heard of the Digital Public Library of America before, that's okay. The project is only about 2.5 years old, which is pretty young, even in the world of things online. So I think it would be useful to start just by talking a little bit about what the Digital Public Library of America is, particularly for those of you who are totally unfamiliar with it. So Digital Public Library of America, or DPLA, as I'm going to call it for the rest of the presentation, is a free national digital library that provides access to materials from libraries, archives, and museums across the US. So we're a nonprofit. We have an office located in the Boston Public Library. The Digital Public Library of America is essentially a website, and it is free to use, no subscription or registration required. And it is essentially a referral point for people to be able to find the digital content that lives on library, archive, and museum websites all across the country. So another way to think about what DPLA is to think of it as a network of partners who make their content available through a single website. I'm going to talk a little bit more about what that means in a second. Or if you, like me, like a very simple definition, I, in my own brain, think of the DPLA as one place to find digital stuff from more than 1,800 institutions. So what does the DPLA offer? Well, as I mentioned, a lot of the material in the DPLA comes from cultural heritage institutions or libraries, archives, and museums. So right now, the DPLA has a really awesome collection of more than 11 million primary source documents and some secondary source documents. Because the 1,800 plus partners that I mentioned are all institutions based in the United States, the DPLA collection does have strengths in US history and culture. But if you think about the kinds of material that you find, for example, in a university special collections, there can sometimes be neat things related to world history topics as well. So US history and culture are a strength, but they're not the only kind of thing that you'll find in the DPLA's collections. I think the DPLA is also a kind of unique opportunity for educators because it offers a really cool mix of national and local resources. So I mentioned again that the DPLA has about 1,800 institutional partners that agree to make their content available through DPLA's website. And those include some big players that you have likely worked with before. So on the slide you see I've chosen for purposes of illustration Art Store, the National Archives, which has its own great education project, and the Smithsonian Institution, which has, of course, been around for a long time and provides great educational resources of its own. In this state, the DPLA also gets content from Digital Commonwealth, if you've heard of that, which is a state digital library that works with historical societies, public libraries, university libraries in the state of Massachusetts. And so the DPLA has content that is this really, I think, unique and interesting mix, pulling from both large federal institutions, large university libraries, as well as through state libraries like Digital Commonwealth, much smaller institutions like Brockton Public Library in the case of this state. So from a student point of view, you really can find primary sources, again, from those federal institutions alongside some really neat, rich, very local source material. The other kind of big thing from an education perspective that the DPLA offers is that all of the content that comes to the DPLA, of course, comes from other institutions. And therefore, it's all really been reviewed and vetted and described by information professionals, by librarians. So it's been through the hands of information professionals, meaning the kinds of content that you get have been reviewed, and the search is not as random as it would be, for example, on a site like Google or other places that index kind of anything that exists on the internet. So in brief, the DPLA's purpose, the reason that the project exists, is really to amplify the signals of partner collections on the web. So again, the Smithsonian, Digital Commonwealth, Brockton Public Library, these places all have their own websites already and the places to host their content. But DPLA provides a second place to sort of amplify the signal of what these institutions are already doing online, and by so doing, get their content hopefully used even more than it's already being used. And I don't know, for those of you who are looking at this picture, if you know who this is, but it's Herbert Hoover, and I kind of like the idea of him amplifying his own signal in a national way by speaking into that microphone. So this model, again, that is intended to encourage use, we also think enriches the research experience for users, because again, you can find really neat research content from a whole variety of institutions through a single website. On the right, you see an example of a women's suffrage postcard that was published by the National Women's Suffrage Publishing Company in 1915. This particular item comes from the Smithsonian. And if you are a suffrage buff, you know that the organizations like the National Women's Suffrage Publishing Company published a lot of postcards and did a lot of postcard campaigning for votes for women. And what's kind of neat about the DPLA is I was recently doing a research project where I was looking at something very specific, which was this kind of particular mode of postcard. And I was looking in the Smithsonian, again, in its own right, has a great collection of about 25 of these, particularly from this organization. But when you look at these postcards by searching through the DPLA, what you find is that the Smithsonian has, again, sort of 25 of them, but there also are neat sort of individual contributions from some institutions in the state of Missouri. And so the collection of postcards about this very narrow topic, for one example, is much richer, right? When these institutions are pooling their collections together, it creates this great research experience, we think, for users. So the DPLA is good for various kinds of research projects, including more traditional research, incorporating primary and secondary sources. So the kinds of research that we have always been doing, projects with students, traditional writing projects. On the right is a manuscript page from the Emily Dickinson archive. So I think of this again as the kind of archival material used that students might make in a research paper, or again, some more traditional assignments. We think the material in the DPLA is also neat for an increasing number of digital projects and open education resources that are serving students' needs in the classroom. So on this particular side, you see the logo for Omeka, which is an open source project that people use to create exhibitions online, as well as History Pin, for those of you who are familiar. So increasingly taking content from places like the DPLA and its partner institutions and getting students to build things with that content as a way of assessing their understanding and allowing them to be creative, while sometimes building some neat digital skills. So how does the DPLA work for people who use it? Well, important to let you know that the DPLA has a very unique URL or link, which is dp.la. There's no .com or .org or .net. It's dp.la, and which is an interesting story. If you write me an email and ask me about it, I can let you know the origin of that. Some people find that to be frustrating, and some people think that it's unique, but we hope either way you'll find it memorable. So if you were to go to dp.la in your browser, you would come to the main page of our site, and on that main page is this pretty traditional search box. Like a lot of search boxes you see on other websites. You can see there is a little ticker that says, at the time that I made this particular screenshot, the project had 11,350,000 about items in it, again, from libraries, archives, and museums across the country. So the way that most people use the DPLA is by entering some keywords into this search box. So for purposes of demonstration, I did a search so that we could just be familiar with the way that the website works for Lewis and Clark. And if you start with me at the top left of this screenshot, you can see that when I entered the search terms in that box, Lewis and Clark, the DPLA returned to me 2,322 search results, which is really a lot of search results. But I heard from Natasha that you've been doing work with keyword searching and putting in good and increasingly narrow keywords. And so I'm sure that you would all be in a good position to help me further refine the search to answer my research question, my hypothetical research question. So you see some familiar things here. You can adjust the number of items that you're seeing per page in the search result list, and you can have some control over how the search results are sorted. But the left-hand panel, I think, is really worth taking a look at, and something that you will probably use later on during the activities when you do some of your own searching on DPLA. It's a place where we can use what are called facets to refine your search results. So you can see that I have already refined this search so that I just see images. So on the DPLA, you can select images or text or sound files or moving images or even physical objects, which really are photographs of physical objects. But just for purposes of demonstration, I've selected to only see images related to my Lewis and Clark search. And then down the list, some of them cut off on this screenshot. You can also narrow by the contributing institution that images or other items come from, the partner that we get them from. You can narrow within a particular date range or language or location or subject term. Again, those would be moving down vertically this list, which is cut off in this screenshot. And then on the right, you see what I hope will look like some sort of familiar search results. And you can see that because the search terms are broad, we got an interesting mix of things, some more directly related to Lewis and Clark, the historical figures, and others related to their legacy. So you see at the bottom sort of some images related to the Lewis and Clark trail. The way that the DPLA works with search relevancy, the title is the most important thing. And you can sort of see that the words Lewis and Clark, in fact, are appearing in the titles of most of the things that are showing up on the top of this list. And so that's an interesting thing to keep in mind. So for purposes of illustration, I chose an item on this list so that you could see what happens if I were to click on a thumbnail or a title of an item on my search results list. I chose the second one. And I would be taken to this, which is a record page for this item that gives descriptive information. So you can see at the top in blue is the title, and again, that familiar thumbnail. The creator of this particular image, the photographer of this daguerreotype. The create date, likely they only knew that it was 1850, which is why you see the January 1st in there. The partner that we get it from is Missouri Hub, which is like Digital Commonwealth, a sort of state-level digital library that works with other institutions in Missouri. The specific institution that holds this and probably digitized it is the Missouri History Museum. Then you can see a description, and I'll admit that I chose this particular item because I thought it had an interesting factoid piece of history within it. And the description reads, Portrait of Meriwether Lewis Clark, son of William Clark, and named after his father's associate, Meriwether Lewis. I think I was not aware that William Clark had a son and named him Meriwether Lewis Clark. So it's almost like those two names have merged, the Lewis and the Clark, into the name of this one fabulous son, which I thought was an interesting historical factoid. So that information is contained within the description. And then below you also see type, which we discussed, which in this case is image. Some information, although not actually super clear in the case of this item, about the rights status of this, so whether this is protected by copyright or it's in the public domain. And then at the bottom, you see the URL for the full item. So if, as a user, you were to come to this record page, you could either click on that URL or underneath the thumbnail, it says View Object, and you would be taken to the Missouri History Museum's website to see the full-size image. On the DPLA's website, you can also save and share lists. So you not only can search and find interesting results, but you can actually, within the DPLA's website, if you do decide to register for an account, which as a reminder, you are not obligated to do, you can go in, Natasha's going to actually help and walk you through this later in the activities, and you can sign up for an account, and through that account, you can make what I think of as sort of a shopping cart for interesting research materials that you find in the DPLA. You can kind of save them and associate with your name so that you can come back to them later. You do that, again, as you'll discuss later in the webinar, by clicking in the top right where it says sign up and creating an account. And once you do, you'll be able to create your own lists. So what you're looking at is actually my account profile. And in 3 tabs on the left, you see your account, which is a place where you can change your username and your password. And then in the middle, this place where I have saved items, and I have created lists from those saved items, which I think is exciting. You can see a little bit of a listing here. I've created some lists about the Civil Rights Movement and the Civil War, and the one that you're looking at right now is my list about the Great Depression. And you'll notice next to it that there's a little lock icon, which is a locked lock if the list is private, which means it's just available to me within my account, and an open lock if the list is public, which means I could share the URL, on social media or in an email or with anybody that I wanted to. This is an important feature, I think, for working with students. So the idea being, if you wanted them to come in and create their own list and just have that be a piece of private work that you did as a class, you could create a common login. Or if you wanted them to share the kinds of research work that they did in a more public way, you could have them create their own accounts and use DPLA in this manner to do their research. One last thing to point out is that all of the these records, the descriptive records, like the Meriwether-Lewis-Clark one that I showed you, and the thumbnails are actually totally open in the DPLA. DPLA is an open source and open data project, which means that people come to the DPLA, and it's a very large collection, and they pull out the material to make new projects, most of them apps. So here's an illustration of two of the many apps that exist in our app library on our website and that people have kind of used the DPLA to make. I'll start with the one on the right, which is a more simple idea. It is an app called OpenPix, and the idea is it's a mobile phone app. And what it does is it uses the geolocator in your phone to pull up historical images of a place that your phone has geolocated you to. So in this example, you can see that this person is in Chicago, and in fact, the app is pulling historical images of Chicago for the user to enjoy, which is a neat idea. And on the left, something a little bit more complicated, but I think pretty exciting, is an app that a research group created called Serendipomatic. And in Serendipomatic, a student, for example, could cut and paste a paragraph of text. I always think of a student cutting and pasting, on maybe an open paragraph of a research paper. And then the text in that paragraph is run behind the scenes through an algorithm. And the program produces what are supposed to be sort of serendipitous results. So results related to many of the different keywords contained in that paragraph of text. I think what's neat about Serendipomatic is the fact that it actually is pulling content in those results, not just from the DPLA, but also from Europeana, which is Europe's digital library. Yes, with all the nations in Europe, which creates language situations that I can't even imagine working with. So Serendipomatic pulls from Europeana and the DPLA, as well as Trove, which is Australia's national digital library, and Digital NZ, which is New Zealand's national digital library. And so that's really exciting. The DPLA seems like a large undertaking to us, but really it's part of a global network of projects that are doing the same kind of thing, and this huge landscape of resources that are being opened up for students to use, for us to use for educational purposes. Which is a good segue into asking the question, the DPLA is obviously a neat research resource for all different kinds of purposes, and hopefully saves users some time instead of going to a million different library archive websites, because you remember that a particular institution has a great collection about this. The DPLA is one place that you can come. But what has the DPLA really specifically been doing for the education context? Well, we have a whole piece of the website devoted to education projects, which I encourage you to check out. It is dp.la/education. But just to talk through them, probably not news to you that primary sources are incredibly valuable education resources and have many uses in the classroom that I'll just go through briefly here. They are, of course, heavily featured in the standards, and with good reason, because primary sources are really, really important for creating context, right? That really important way of fleshing out a story, showing detail, giving students a sense of time period, giving them a sense of the context for a person, a place, an event. Of course, primary sources are also a really important part of the support structure for inquiry-based instruction. So primary sources become important documents for students to learn how to read, and archival material now can make its way into the classroom for that kind of inquiry-based instruction much more easily than before because of the digital world. And finally, primary sources are incredibly valuable as material for the kinds of projects and activities that we increasingly do with students. So primary sources, especially digital ones, are great material for digital storytelling projects. They are important for the construction of document-based questions and timelines and other kinds of research projects that we now support in our classrooms. On the right, by the way, is the DPLA's education poster, which I personally love and we give out for free. So shoot me an email if you have an interest in free education posters or other kinds of material to share with your students. The DPLA, as I mentioned, is really not very old. So around about July 2014, which is about a year after we launched, we got a grant from a group called the Whiting Foundation to do some research. We work with this huge range of partners, as I mentioned. So some people like the National Archives and the Smithsonian who've really been doing education work for a long time, and other people who've not been doing it for as long or don't do it yet. So we did a research project for about 9 months, and we did interviews with some of our partners who had a lot of experience doing education work. And we also did a number of focus groups with educators. So we did at that stage focus mostly on grades kind of 4 through 12, and also we spoke with a number of folks in higher education. That research produced a paper that is very long, and I wrote it, so I can make fun of the fact that it's very long. And if you have an interest in that kind of education research, you can find it at tinyurl.com/DPLA education. But I'll give you some highlights of the findings here. Many of them probably seem self-evident to you, but it was important to us as an organization to kind of do our homework about what other cultural heritage institutions were providing in the digital landscape for the classroom and what seemed like it worked for them and what didn't work as well for them. So big findings from our research were, number one, that it was really important increasingly to create resources for that both students and teachers could use. So that the sort of older model was to create things that were very teacher-centered, so that it was sort of teachers who would come online, find an idea, and then transform it for students to use. But a lot of the feedback we got said that students were, of course, very proficient users of the internet. And so it was important to keep them as a direct audience in mind when trying to sort of make use of online resources. Of course, not surprising to you probably, we also got again and again the advice that education projects worked well and did not work well depending on the amount of educator input. So it was recommended to us that we get really regular core input from actual teachers in what we call grades 6 through 14. So that's 6 through 12, and then of course the sort of early years of higher education. And then finally, we got a lot of feedback on the question of volume. So I've been throwing around numbers in this presentation, and I've been talking about the fact that the DPLA has more than 11 million items, and that's great. But it makes for an overwhelming experience depending on what you're looking for in the DPLA. And so we were interested from the beginning of the project about how we could get students and teachers really to the kinds of material in the DPLA that they might be interested in looking at faster. And the recommendation was that we should be creating sort of primary source sets or small collections that were almost a highlight reel for a particular curricular topic. And so that was the direction in which we proceeded. So soon after, we got ourselves an education advisory committee, which is really exciting. Folks on this committee teach in grades 6 through 14, really all over the US. Only 4 of them are on this screenshot, and you can see Carrie Dunn, Director for History and Social Studies for BPS, featured as the second person, which is just a coincidence because of the D in her last name. These people are alphabetized, but also on this slide, a teacher from West Virginia, a history professor from a university in Georgia, someone from the New York City Department of Ed. So we have 10 people on this Education Advisory Committee, and they have been really instrumental to us in creating the project that I'm about to show you, which is the DPLA's Primary Source Sets project, which you can find at dp.la/primary source sets, or again from our education page. But this is what that project looks like. So again, we got this group of people together. Last July, we hashed out what we thought was a good template for a primary source set, sort of how many sources, what material goes with it, how do we pick the sources, who are we making the sets for? And it's been exciting to watch this project come together so quickly, but this is the sort of main page of the primary source sets project that you'll explore later in your activities. And this is a little bit deceptive because ultimately there are actually 60 of these things up here, and they are now mostly US history, literature, and culture topics. But the committee has had really been the driving force behind picking the topics. They do peer review of each other's sets. And you can see that we've even started to implement a tagging system so that you can use those menus at the top to look for, all of the history sets or all of the literature sets or all the sets from the colonial period. You can sort these chronologically and in other ways as well, which is really exciting. So this is, again, a place that I think that you'll be exploring later in this session. But this is the Primary Source Sets project. I'm going to show off the new woman, which you see in that top row in the middle, which is as an example of a primary source set, so we can dig in a little bit to what is included in these. This is the new woman primary source set. So you can see that at the top there is a sort of overview paragraph that gives us, identifies the new woman as an idea, explains what it is. Students are an intended audience for this page, so you can sort of see that it's not explicitly created for teachers, although there is a teaching guide linked from the top right, which we'll look at in a minute. And then below this overview, there are 10 to 15 individually selected primary sources related to the new woman with captions. So if we were to click on one of these sources, we would see it in full view along with citation information and credits. as well as a link back to sort of seeing the item in the DPLA. And I love this item for those of you who are interested in the new woman as an idea. The caption reads, "An image of the new woman from 1899. She reads the newspaper in her riding bloomers with her bicycle nearby as her husband does the wash." Right? It's just like a really interesting way in which the whole idea of the new woman is sort of turning the Victorian woman on her head. And we think about the husband doing the wash and the woman and the sort of iconic new woman on her bicycle, which you can see in the primary sources in this set is sort of an interesting theme, the idea of bicycle riding women. The teaching guide for the new woman set looks like this. Again, it has a link back to the set itself. And then the person who created the set actually wrote some discussion questions. So they meant to be inspirational for teachers who want to use the set in the classroom. So not a definitive, prescriptive index of what you should do with it, but some ideas about what you could do with it. So you notice that the discussion questions make reference to specific items in the set. And then also there is a suggested classroom activity at the bottom here. And then on the right, you see some more generic tools for primary source analysis. So some questions that you could ask about really any source in this set, some sort of reminders about good points of entry for inquiry-based learning, as well as familiar tools likely from the National Archives and the Library of Congress, who've long been in the business of helping teachers and students think through how to analyze primary sources. So we don't need to reinvent the wheel. We can just link to great things that other folks and our partners are doing. So a teaching guide kind of contains this, again, these ideas about how to make use of a set in the classroom. This is a set that I made about the Wounded Knee Massacre. I'll just share a little bit of personal reflection about it because it was really fun and, of course, also a little depressing to make. You can see this one has a little bit longer of an overview. And then it has a rich mix, I think, of documents and photographs and other kinds of material related to the Wounded Knee Massacre. Just to give you a little flavor, this particular item is from the National Archives and Records Administration. And they have quite an interesting collection of correspondence that went back and forth between the various folks in the Army around Pine Ridge as the events heated up that would lead to the Wounded Knee Massacre. This particular item is a telegram, and you can see at the bottom, because of handwriting, we've transcribed it, so it's easier to read. And this is a sort of report on the situation of what the Lakota are doing in response to Sitting Bull's death. So this is December 20th, 1890. And this telegram includes an interpretation of the ghost dance, for those of you familiar with Wounded Knee, calling it squaw death chant, which is part of this whole sort of nervousness about what's happening at Wounded Knee and what the ghost dance means and how violent the Lakota will be. So again, just to give you a little flavor of the sets themselves. And then, of course, the teaching guide, again, familiar discussion questions. This particular set, I did write a few more activities because I was inspired. But what's interesting about this set is, of course, that the DPLA has some of the same limitations as, collections that we find in archives across the country. In the case of this set, meaning, you see that very first question says, consider the sources in this set. What perspectives on the events at Wounded Knee do they share? What perspectives are missing? A lot of the material I found in here, not surprisingly, was created by United States government officials and did not give the Lakota perspective on the Wounded Knee Massacre. And so interesting entry point for students to think about, what exists within a set or an archive and what are the kinds of things that are missing. We do also have sets that are about literature and art. So I did just want to show off really quickly. This is a set that one of our committee members made about Beloved by Toni Morrison. And I think literature, of course, gets taught in the history classroom. So not to make too fine a line in terms of what can be used in what context, but I think the literature sets are interesting because from a primary source perspective, there's some stuff in here about Medea, which is a sort of myth around Beloved. There's also stuff about Margaret Garner, who is, of course, this specific inspirational story that Beloved was written about. And then there's also some material about the life of the author, about Toni Morrison. So primary sources can take on multiple sort of meanings in this set. For the purpose of showing you a little bit how some of the discussion questions work with the items, this is actually one of Carrie Dunn's sets about the American abolitionist movement. And it features this very famous Wedgwood medallion that says on it, if you can't read, am I not a man and a brother? And it's a very famous image, abolitionist image. And with it, to sort of work with this particular item, Carrie writes a question: how are visual images, including objects such as the British medallion and the popular press, used to advance the abolitionist cause? So again, taking a very specific primary source within the set and helping think about ways to make use of it with students. Here's a set written by a 6th grade history teacher from Lexington, South Carolina, named Albert Robertson. He did this set about the Spanish-American War, a very short, interesting conflict. And he focused a lot of his sources rightly on many poems and songs and things that within the US mustered up a lot of sympathy for Cuba that helped us decide that we should go to war with Spain. So this is a particular item that goes with the question that Albert wrote, which is what role did propaganda play in the development of this war? Cite evidence from the 2 songs and other sources in this set. So again, just showing you the way that some of these particular sources kind of pair with questions from the teaching guides. A couple more examples. This is a set called Road to Revolution, about the road to the American Revolutionary War by a teacher named James Walsh, who's a high school AP US history teacher from Georgetown, Kentucky. Lots of great material in this set, including this particular item, housed at the Boston Public Library and digitized by the Internet Archive. Again, you can see that it's been transcribed at the bottom because it's probably a little bit hard to read. And if this was a live web page, you could scroll through the pages of this letter. But this is a letter from a few familiar folks requesting a town hall meeting to consider the Tea Act. And then the question, which I love, reads: after reading the letter from Samuel Adam, Paul Revere, and others, reflect on what events or actions may have been planned or considered at this meeting. And of course, the suggestion here is, you know, we can't say for sure, but what are some of the possible plots that these folks could have hatched at this town hall meeting? And finally, an example from a set that I wrote, because it's easy to talk about research that you did. This is a set that I wrote about the transatlantic slave trade, so both a US and a world history topic. And this question that I wrote works with 2 items. So this is a ad for a slave sale from a very small institution in New York State, and the ad reads: for sale, a remarkable, smart, healthy Negro wench, about 22 years of age, used to both housework and farming, and sold for no fault but want of employ. She has a child about 9 months old, which will be at the purchaser's option. And the question that goes with this, which is a little bit of a sad note, I guess, to leave the sets on, is what specific story about slavery do the 1797 advertisement seen here and the illustration of a woman and child on the auction block tell together? So this is the image of a woman and child on the auction block. And of course, it's that awful, I'm just going to go back for a second, bureaucratic phrase about a 9-month-old child being at the purchaser's option, kind of paired with this picture that is intended to get students thinking about the brutal pain of the separation of families as part of the commercial trade that was slavery, and the way that that broke families apart and made family relationships into sort of business transactions. Important thing to think about when we think about what the experience of slavery might have been like for women and children and fathers. What is in store for the DPLA in the future? Well, this particular first pass with our excellent 10-person committee has promised a full yield of 100 sets by May 2016. So we're actually in the middle of a 3rd round, which will have 40. I said there are already 60 up on the site. We'll be producing 40 more by May 2016. We'll also continue to add features. So we want to continue to improve the website. I think that it's pretty easy to navigate now, but we want to create a little bit more connective tissue. So we want to start recommending, if you like this set, you might want to look at these sets and those kinds of things to try to get users of the site to circulate a little bit more within the material. We also do want to work in the future on creating even better ways for students and teachers to be able to come on and make their own sets. Of course, it's exciting to look at work that other people have made that might be of value in your classroom, but it can be even better to be able to generate your own stuff, and of course can be an interesting assessment tool when you work with students. So we hope, in addition to the list feature that you're going to work with today, to sort of make that a little bit more robust. And we are going to pursue funding options for the project in the future. So we work on a grant now, but I think there are some good possibilities for getting more money to build this project out even more. Really exciting to us because although the idea of a primary source set is not particularly new or innovative, the Library of Congress has been making them for a while. we are really in a unique position to be working with material from all kinds of different institutions. So there are really an infinite number of stories that we can tell with the content available through the DPLA, and that's been really exciting. So in addition to primary source sets, the DPLA does also offer a group of about 30 online exhibitions. The difference between these and primary source sets is that they are, I think of them as long form. So they are include a lot more writing, as you'll see, and also they are more like 60 to 80 items as opposed to the 10 to 15 in the small primary source set. Two of my favorites here, an exhibition that's actually created by some students about the gold rush, and then an exhibition about patent medicine, or sort of snake oil medicine period, which I think is really a kind of a neat topic. Here's an example of an exhibition called Patriotic Labor, America During World War I. So you get a little bit of a flavor of what the exhibitions are like. There is a written introduction, cut off the screenshot. There are also some credits and a citation, so you could read about who had created this exhibition, and there would be a citation for students to use. And then underneath the introductory paragraphs you see at the top, there actually are 7 themes or sort of chapters associated with this exhibition. If you're familiar with World War I, the grouping of these probably makes some sense to you. But again, each of these then within it has several pages. So if you think about it, this exhibition at 7 chapters and, we'll say an average of 3 pages is actually sort of 21 pages worth of interesting items and some good writing. So these are much longer, but interesting to explore, and often about, I think, some pretty curricular topics. So I love this particular page, which is about Hoover's campaign to save food, and this particular poster that I've highlighted that you can see says, "Save the products of the land, eat more fish, they feed themselves." Lots of really neat propaganda posters in here encouraging various kinds of saving, which is neat. So the exhibitions are also something, I think they're at dp.la/exhibitions. They're also something that would be worth checking out. Finally, the DPLA isn't just, as I said, it has a mission of amplifying the signal of partner collections. So we actually also share the content that we get from partners with other projects. We don't just try to get people to use it on our website, we share it out. So we create resources for National History Day projects in a number of different states. We share the education resources that we build also through PBS Learning Media and the Learning Registry, for those who are familiar with that project from the Department of Education. And finally, actually just this week, the DPLA is one partner with the New York Public Library and First Books, launching an open ebooks initiative in collaboration with the White House, which is pretty exciting, which is a program that offers open ebooks to students from schools with a large number of free and reduced lunch students. So if you are interested in reading more about that particular project, you can find information if you Google Open eBooks Initiative. But so again, the idea being that the DPLA is really trying to circulate this content broadly in the education world. So in the future, the DPLA is a project with a really broad mission. We will continue to get a lot of content from libraries, archives, and museums, so that kind of special collections, archival material that I've shown off a lot today. As I also mentioned, the DPLA is going to grow its collection of ebooks, so you may see the scale shifting a little bit, not all primary sources, but also a lot of secondary source material. The DPLA is also looking to work with projects like Chronicling America and other large-scale newspaper projects to try to work meaningfully with newspapers and get those kinds of items into the collection in a usable way. As well as, not things that are so completely focused around the humanities, so as well as thinking through data sets and other kinds of research material that would be useful to scientists of various kinds. So really, we hope that you'll be interested in following the progress of the DPLA after this session. And I think that you'll see a lot of expansion in the collection. For some perspective, I said that the DPLA launched in April 2013, and at the time we had 2.4 million items and 500 partners. And now we have more than 11 million items and 1,800 partners. So really in just 2.5 years, the project's been growing and growing. And I think these are some directions in which you'll see the DPLA grow in the future, which is really exciting. And finally, on the right, it's the Buck Rogers spaceship, which is my own personal vision of the future, which is from the National Air and Space Museum. So the DPLA, finally, as sort of final note before we get into the activities portion, the DPLA is new to education work, very eager to work with teachers, and eager to hear feedback of all kinds. So I mentioned we do a lot of professional development events. We give out free posters, we give out free stickers. We're very eager for feedback about the site or about the project or questions that you might have. So again, I've mentioned the website itself is dp.la, but we also are active on Twitter, and the education team has its very own email address, which is education@dp.la. And finally, my name is Frankie Abbott again, and my email address is here because I'm personally excited to hear from you if you have questions or feedback. Frankie with a Y at dp.la, and I am also active on Twitter if you're interested in getting in touch with me there. Thanks so much for sitting through my presentation. I hope that it was informative and useful. And now I'm going to turn it back over to Natasha to talk about what's next.
First of all, I just want to say great appreciation for the slides and the use of primary sources within the slides. I think it's great to model the amazing resources that you have. In this session, what you're going to do is you're going to go back into the Google Classroom, and in the Google Classroom, you are going to have the usual few assignments. Today's assignments, the first assignment is really giving you a chance to explore using key terms. And so what you're going to do is you're going to be exploring the 15th Amendment, and we have a nice graphic organizer in a Google Doc that'll help guide you through that discovery. Then after that, we actually want you to go ahead and create one of those free accounts on the DPLA website, as Frankie showed us how to do, because that'll allow you to create lists that are then appropriate for your classroom and your own instruction. You're gonna create an account, go ahead and explore, create a list of a topic that's relevant to your content area, whether you're teaching in middle school, high school, or elementary, and then you're actually going to share the list. So step 1 will be create account, step 2 is going to be create a list, and step 3 is actually going to be going back and sharing that list on one of our Google Docs. That way we can show each other, and really we're just asking you to curate 5 items that you think would be great resources to use in the classroom. And then your final activity is actually going to be exploring those primary source sets with teacher guides that Frankie showed us at the end. Selecting one guide, kind of diving in a little deeper, and then sharing out what you've learned from that guide with the group. That really allows us to depend on each other for learning, and also that collaborative atmosphere. There is no way every single individual one of us can read all of those, but really we can pull out some highlights and say, this is a great resource if you're teaching 6th grade Ancient Civ, or if you're teaching 7th grade World Geography, really go ahead and look after this. So those will be your activities that you're going to explore today. Overall, just great presentation today by Frankie. Really want to thank her for that. And we hope you enjoy the activities this afternoon. And go ahead and dive in. And please feel free to let us know what you're thinking. And at the end, you will have your exit ticket. As always, we take your feedback meaningfully to help us plan and adjust for sessions to come. So again, thank you, Frankie. And we'll be signing off for the evening.
Bye-bye. Thanks for listening to my presentation. I'm so glad you got to meet me and see DPLA.
Okay, thanks again, everybody.